Hello, this is Mary Fahey from London, and I'm going to kickstart my talk by reading the lovely Psychic Manifesto, just an extract from our Jane Roberts. And magically, Kate, and Ashara have made it so that it's in front of the Seth house. So I'm there really. A Psychic Manifesto. My life is its own definition. So is yours. Let us leave the priests to their hells and heavens and confine the scientists to their dying universe with its accidentally created stars. Let us each dare to open our dream's door and explore the unofficial thresholds where we begin. This is Mary Fahey here from London, England, and for my second segment of the presentation today, I've called it Once Upon a Seth Book, Life Changes, Big Time, because it's true for me. So why me, why now, you may ask? Well, I thought, Mr. Biden over there is, I hear he's 78 years old and he thinks he can run America. Well, has anyone given him the book? And I'm 77 in London town, and I thought, I'll give a go at this Zoom fandango and present at the Seth Conference in San Francisco. Okay. So, why did I choose the book, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events, you may ask? Well, in many respects, it chose me. So let's just give you a bit of background. I'll tell you the story. Last March, we had lockdown discussed here in London, which I have to say I didn't really believe, but it did happen. Life changed quite dramatically, the isolation and so on. But I went about my day as best I could, and during that time, I went to bed one night and found myself dreaming of a Seth book. Yes, it was The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. I woke up in the morning and, chose to duck it really. I thought there's no significance here. Went about my day. The second night, again, I went off to bed. And once again, I found myself dreaming of reading that book, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. And this time in the morning, there was a significance. It was a sharper dream, a much brighter dream, a fuller dream. And the content of the dream stayed with me, although I couldn't remember the content of the book. So the third night, I went to bed again, and this time, dreaming of the book, I woke up dreaming of the book. And so with a sigh, I'll go and get that book. So I came downstairs, went to my bookcase, and there the book was, shining at me, waiting to be picked up, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. So I picked it up, went back to bed, opened it, and it's all about the pandemic, viruses, earthquakes. I can't share this. I can't read this now. But I couldn't put it down. So I must have read it for about an hour, with my mouth open. And in the morning, still anxious about the content and not feeling able to share it, I rang my younger sister. And she was the only one at that time who was reading the Seth books along with me. Otherwise, I was a total solo reader. And she'd ring up every now and again and go, Mary, have you got another Seth book yet? Because in those days, the 80s and 90s, we had to wait 6 months for a copy, would you believe, coming over from America. Counting the days. Anyway, I told her about the content of the book just briefly, and she said, I think that should be shared, Mary, it's important. I thought, well, no relief there, because I still didn't feel confident about sharing it with anyone, because the pace of getting a vaccine, getting tested, make sure you've got enough masks, be clear about distancing, stay at home, was all the rage here. So I quietly carried on reading it bit by bit, going about my days. And out of the blue, I got an email from America from my friend Mike, who's in California. We've gone to many Seth conferences together, had lovely times, especially the one in Elmira, where these books were written by Jane Roberts. And in his email, out of the blue, he invited me to attend a Seth conference in California by Zoom. And I thought, oh, because I used to run Seth groups for many years. And I thought, oh, I will. Even though it was near my bedtime, it was 9 p.m. in the evening, 1 o'clock California time. So I zoomed in, and Paul, the host of the Seth group, warmly welcomed me and asked me how London town was and so on. And I just told him how I dreamt about reading the book. And it seemed immediately he suggested we change the book we're reading and we'll start reading that, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events. I was a bit taken aback, but also I felt pleased. Relieved, really. And at the end of the session, as I went off to bed, I realised how much lighter I felt. And I thought, this Seth group, these people are seasoned Seth readers. They'll sort it out. They'll help me out. And I felt safe. God, did I sleep well that night? So I continued attending Seth group meetings in San Francisco every 2 weeks, not every time, because sometimes I just fell asleep before it started. And one of the weeks, Jeff, one of the members, just said, almost in passing, it seems to me, that they were thinking of doing a Seth conference by Zoom. And it was just amazing to me how I found myself automatically saying, I want to present. It was like a light bulb moment. I want to present at that conference. And here I am. Well, it's just to recap there, the 3 easy steps, easy and effortless, apart from me ignoring the wake-up calls by the dreams. Then the email, and then the setup of the Seth Conference, all given to me. And I have to say that's Linda Dahl, lovely woman who I really believe is a sister of mine in another lifetime, set up the Seth Network International along with other colleagues. She's written many books, and one of the books is 1,000 Whispers. Well, I've got to tell you, Linda, I don't hear the whispers, love. I seem to need shouts 3 times this time round. Okay, so the individual and nature of mass events. And all of Seth's books are long titles. I mean, they take a day to digest, never mind any of the content. But just think of that wonderful title. I love it. The individual and nature of mass events. For me, it implies that we are all connected, and we're all equal too. And I want to give a first quote now from The Codicils by Jane Roberts, from her book Psychic Politics. And think of that in the 70s, writing a book called Psychic Politics. Love it. Wonderful woman, wonderful book. I'm just going to read, there's about 10 or 11 codicils. I sort of compare them to the 10 Commandments, if you like, that all start with thou shalt not. These are more affirmative, and this one is my favourite. All of creation is sacred and alive, each part connected to each other part, and each communicating in a creative cooperative commerce in which the smallest and the largest are equally involved. Smallest and the largest are equally involved. And that to me, apart from the wonder of the equality and the cooperation, it implies that the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, have all got lives of their own too, and they're all part of it. So we've got to step up to the plate sometime to actually respect all life, haven't we? So The book, The Individual and Nature of Mass Events, I'm going to just refer to it as mass events from now on because it's such a mouthful. It's in 4 parts. I'm not going to do the whole part because obviously we'd be here for a fortnight. But I'm going to bring out the what I see as the important parts. And I've done my best to highlight it. And because we're still in lockdown, I haven't been able to photocopy because our printer is out of order here. I haven't been able to photocopy the extract, so I've had to sort of put cards in with. Anyway, so where am I? Now, the first chapter, let me just read the title of that one. The chapters alone, the titles are enough. Part 1, The Events of Nature, Epidemics and Natural Disasters. Chapter 1, The Natural Body and Its Defences. Again, it implies we've got our own defences. I just love it. Okay. Let's start. The question of epidemics, for example, cannot be answered from a biological standpoint alone. It involves great sweeping psychological attitudes on the part of many and meets the needs and desires of those involved. Needs which, in your terms, arise in a framework of religious, psychological, and cultural realities that cannot be isolated from biological results. So I think in our time right now, we are just looking at it all from a biological standpoint. You know, the droplets in the air, we can breathe them in. Look at the vaccine so that you can give you a little drop of the virus to create our own immunity. But there's something else going on as well. And what Seth actually says, and I really find myself in sympathy with it, it's about social change. You know, there's a lot of hardship going on right now, isn't there? And I want to start by highlighting the plague, which again was in the UK, and why it was decimating. I remember doing it at school. And here he goes. To a certain extent, epidemics are the result of a mass suicide phenomenon on the parts of those involved. Oh. In some historical periods, the plight of the poor was so horrible, so unendurable, that outbreaks of the plague occurred, literally resulting in a complete destruction of large areas of the environment in which, here we go, such social, political, and economic conditions existed. Those plagues took rich and poor alike, however, so the complacent, well-to-do could see quite clearly, for example, that to some extent sanitary conditions, privacy, peace of mind had to be granted to the poor alike, for the results of their dissatisfaction would have quite practical results. Those deaths were deaths of protest. And interestingly, with the plague, I remember vaguely at school about how the social chain came in. There was no sewage systems. You know, I mean, can you imagine? But all those structures by the survivors who actually became in contact with the people who were affected or the devastation just near their area really took a constructive effort to make a huge difference for rich and poor alike. So the sewage systems were set up, travel was set up, and so on. So it's, and of course, there's always been the talk about, thank goodness diseases are catching, because everybody will kind of look after each other. Yeah. Here we are. The environment in which an outbreak occurs points at the political, sociological, and economic conditions that have evolved, causing such disasters. Often such outbreaks take place after ineffective political or social action. That is, after some unified mass social protest has failed or is considered hopeless. They often occur also in wartime on the part of the populace that is against a given war in which its country is involved. And it reminds me of the Jarrow marches here in England, from Newcastle and up north. Many people after the First World War en masse marched to London, hundreds of miles. They were starving, and the only way they could bring the truth of their dilemma was to get to the House of Parliament, our legislative bodies in London. And as a result of those marches, more work was created, better living standards were created, they built more houses, So it's a shame that we seem to need to have these big protests to actually effect change, but that seems a way of it right now. Still staying with the chapter 1, the natural body, says the epidemics then serve many purposes, warning that certain conditions will not be tolerated. There is a biological outrage that will be continually expressed until the conditions are changed. Amazing, because that really reminds me of that Jarrow March. They were outraged when they passed the Ritz Hotel and saw the wealth and the opulence there. And apparently, so rumour has it, that some of the men just barged in there. I don't know whether that's true or not, but anyway, the conditions did change. And also, epidemics, by their public nature, speak of public problems. So it's food for thought, don't you think? Okay, we're moving on now to chapter 2, headed Mass Meditations, in quotes, health, close quotes, plans for disease, epidemics of beliefs, and effective mental inoculations against despair. And just let's think about that title. I've never thought of epidemics of beliefs. We think about epidemics on the physical plane, don't we? Not on the mental sphere of our beliefs and our thoughts and our thinking. And going back to getting the book that night, I looked in the front of the book and I'd purchased it in 1996, which is 25 years ago. And with each Seth book, I had to read them twice. The first time, it was too deep and indigestible. The second time reading, I got some of the gist. I obviously saw this book as something historical, maybe hysterical, but certainly not affecting me in any way. It was written in America, nothing to do with London. But when I picked it up this time, it was all alive in 3D. So epidemics of beliefs, how about that? Just the thought of that makes you change how you think. And mental inoculations against despair. Well, we always talk about inoculations and vaccines, giving you the minute dose of the actual disease so that you can build up your immune system, which we have to say has worked pretty effectively in terms of TB, smallpox, scarlet fever, and so on. But Seth gives another dynamic about social change. So if we start with that and change our social structures, maybe we won't need to look at vaccines. Who knows? Oh, yes. Oh, this is an interesting snippet. I laughed out loud. It's still in the chapter 2. It's under the mass meditations part. On a conscious level, and with your conscious reserves alone, you couldn't keep your body alive for an hour. How about that? You wouldn't know how to do it, for your life flows through you automatically and spontaneously. You take the details for granted, and we do, don't we? We don't have to say, hold on, I've just got to take a few breaths now. It's a given. The breathing, the inner mechanisms of nourishment and elimination, the circulation, and the maintenance of your psychological continuity. All of that is taken for granted, taken care of for you in Framework 2. Just to touch on Framework 2 that Seth talks about. Framework 2 is his term for the inner world, the inner life, the God part, the soul part. For me, it's where our wisdom resides, readily available when we allow and accept and ask for it. Framework 1 is our physical bodies, which apparently wouldn't last for an hour without the backup of framework 2. How about that? So on the note of it all being taken care of, I'd like to give you, because I'm sprinkling in around other books as well as the Seth book and James, about how we're taken care of, comes to mind from Psychic Politics, James' book. What a wonderful title, Psychic Politics. A poem called The Sumari Healing Song. And I'm just going to read the opening verse. While you were sleeping, all the cupboards of the earth were filled. Mother Earth sought out each need. Read the rest when you have time. It's just a beautiful, enabling poem. And it just makes me so clear that we're taken care of. And that God didn't run out when it was your turn or my turn. All the goodies are there for all of us. And what is even better, that Seth's doctrine implies that your gain isn't my loss, and my gain isn't your loss. In fact, your gain is my gain, and fulfillment and better is for all of us. Cooperation really does reign, you know. And going on about Framework 1 and Framework 2 again, I'm going to quote from Rob Butts, the co-author of the Seth books, who did all the transcribing. And he did a little story, if you like, and he called it his credo, and they both used it to actually make Framework 2 become more alive in their life. And he starts his credo, and they've got it on their wall apparently. I have the simple, profound faith that anything I desire in this life can come to me from Framework 2. There are no impediments in Framework 2. Framework 2 can creatively produce everything I desire. And he goes on to details. Well, for me, I do a simpler version. As much as I know how to, and I catch myself, I think and expect the best. And often that the old way was to prepare for the worst. But I've decided I'm going to dump that bit. I just expect the best. And obviously in my life I have challenges, difficulties and pain and so on. But I try as much as I can to look for the gift there. And that works for me. And in terms of bringing Framework 2 alive, you can look at, I hope you'll find the next segment on the 4 I's, all inner work, the impulses, inspiration, intuition, inner knowing. And I see that as a gestalt for imagination. Because of course our imagination creates our world. There we are, that's the credo, Rob's credo. This was one I couldn't quite digest, and I'm still working with it, but we're still, we've moved to myths and physical events. I quote, objectively, whatever the appearances, storms, earthquakes, floods, etc., are quite necessary to the well-being of the earth. Well, the only context I can put it in is that when we have a heavy rain downpour, there's a lovely sweetness in the air. There's a real clearing and freshness in the air. And the grass seems to grow quicker. The flowers open and bloom afterwards. But it's when the rain doesn't stop that becomes a tsunami that's a bit of a challenge. But I'll leave that with you. And of course, again, in the change of seasons, in the wintertime, animals, being wise, Many of them hibernate. And over the years as I've got older, I tend to slow right down in the winter time. Curl up in front of the fire, read a book, leave the outside because it's much warmer and cosier inside. So there's sort of the downtime and the electric uptime, isn't it? Where are we now? This chapter is referring to framework 2. But I just love the idea that Seth talks about how, and we know this because when we're born as children, we never have to say, oh, I hope my skin doesn't grow too long on my hands, do we? Or our one leg is, moving out sideways. It's all uniform and beautiful, isn't it? So he says at birth, each person is automatically equipped with the capacity toward natural growth that will most completely satisfy its own abilities, not at the expense of others, but an overall context in which the fulfillment of each individual assures the fulfillment of each other individual. Oh, I love that. And let's imagine it's true. Make our place a different place. Although competition with yourself is healthy, but competition replaced largely by cooperation. And this is another pause to actually read another quote from Jane Roberts, the poem Self-Love, Self-Expression and Poetry from her book, If We Live Again. When we are young children, we are in love with ourselves in a way that perhaps animals are, almost unthinkingly, automatically enjoying ourselves as states of being. The sounds and sensations of our own bodies delight us, and in our acceptance of ourselves, we add to the enjoyment of other people who watch our innocent absorption. And that's so true to life, isn't it? You can see young children, they don't know how to walk. They skip and jump and hop, don't they? Full of life. Like the animals, the dog that charges after you and looks at you with big eyes for the tiniest morsel. Magic. Moving on here. We've reached the section, the mechanics of experience. It's chapter 5. Your world and everything in it exists first in the imagination. You have been taught to focus all of your attention upon physical events so that they carry the authenticity of reality for you. Thoughts, feelings, or beliefs appear to be secondary, subjective, or somehow not real, and they seem to rise in response to an already established field of physical data. You usually think, for example, that your feelings about a given event are primarily reactions to the event itself, but Seth talks about it being the other way round. It seldom occurs to you that the feelings themselves might be primary, and that the particular event was somehow a response to your emotions, rather than the other way around. So that's really interesting that, the thoughts, our beliefs feed our world, feed our experiences. So it's a good idea to look at our beliefs and thoughts, isn't it? Eventually. Because, the world is created through our imagination. And the feelings are the measure of how we are. If we feel good, that's great. We attract good to us. If we feel bad, we attract the stuff that's not so good for us or called negative. And it's worth looking at our thoughts and our feelings to make the measure about our own personal well-being. Seth says your feelings, however, cause the events you perceive. Secondarily, you do, of course, then react to those events. Moving on. Where are we? Positive and negative behaviour. Where are we? Oh, yeah. The good, the bad, and the catastrophic is the year. There is nothing more stimulating, more worthy of actualization than the desire to change the world for the better. That is indeed each person's mission. You begin by working in that area of activity that is your own unique one, with your own life and activities. You begin in the corner of an office, or on the assembly line, or in the advertising agency, or in the kitchen. You begin where you are. You begin where you are. When you fulfill your own abilities, when you express your personal idealism through acting it out to the best of your abilities in your daily life, then you are changing the world for the better. Well, go to it, innit? So, summing up if I can, the pandemic, COVID-19 as it's called sometimes, what was its purpose? Everything must have a purpose for me. So for me now, with the understanding that I have, the purpose of the pandemic was social change for the better. There's been an awful lot of hardship. And, I can go out any day now. I go for my walks because it's very limited access, but I go for my walks and I always find someone sleeping rough. That certainly wasn't the case when I was growing up. So there's been huge changes, not always for the good, that's caused hardship and that we've got to address as a nation, as a people. And so I really would like to see social change for the better. And I like the word socialism, although it often gets a bad press. It basically means sharing what's available with everyone. I think we're socialists at home. We look after each other, we help each other, we pick each other up, don't we? Wouldn't it be wonderful if the whole community can adopt socialism? It only means sharing what's available, sharing it for all. After all, as Seth says, we're practicing idealists. I love that. So let's give up blaming. Transmute, if you can, your feelings of anger. And importantly, anger is a natural phenomenon. It's a good release, but it's your emotion, no one else's. So don't give your anger to others. If you feel you need to release the pent-up feelings, get in front of a mirror. I do it. How dare you speak to me, or whatever it is that's working you. And in a few minutes, you can feel the release of that anger. Sometimes compassion comes in, sometimes it doesn't. But you can share the feelings with an equanimity that you couldn't when there's anger behind it. And along with the anger, look at the word selfish. I'd like that taken out of the dictionary, please, and be replaced by a healthy self-interest. It has far more of a positive outlook. And this healthy self-interest is good for us, it's good for all of us. Our own well-being always starts first. Seth says, start where you are. And finally, nearly finally, gifts of the virus. Well, for me, it's like a wake-up call. Priorities have to change. There's too much hardship, increasing homelessness, wars are still going on, or mass murders, as Seth calls them. We have to change our priorities. I've certainly changed mine since the lockdown, which we're still here in London town, to really change my values, that me time is good for me, that I can have quiet time of reflection, of just sitting, looking out the window, doing nothing, but the imagination, that film inside rolling. I look inwards much more naturally, and when I look outwards, I'm more aware of nature, more aware of the sky and the earth, seeing the aliveness in the trees, having far more compassion for my fellow humans, well, most of them. And I want to say what I've really noticed over the last few years, really, is the quickening in our young ones. They seem to get this inner work far more spontaneously. It never really was spontaneous for me. I had to have it knocked into my inside door. So I want to finish now with a lovely poem, if I can find it. You are born loving. And it's from the book The Nature of Massive Events. And take it in at a deep level. You are born loving. You are born compassionate. You are born curious about yourself and your world. Those attributes also belong to natural law. You are born knowing that you possess a unique, intimate sense of being that is itself, that seeks its own fulfillment and the fulfillment of others. I love that line. That seeks its own fulfillment and the fulfillment of others. You are born seeking the actualization of the ideal. You are born seeking to add value to the quality of life, to add characteristics, energies, abilities to life that only you individually can contribute to the world, and to attain a state of being that is uniquely yours, while adding to the value fulfillment of the world. All these qualities and attributes are given you by natural law. You are a cooperative species, and you are a loving one. There we are.